I'm Tatum Skipper, and welcome to Real Florida Magazine.
Welcome back. Here today on the beautiful campuses of Florida Panhandle Technical College, we've got a surprise guest today. We've got Matt Gaetz, currently Florida Representative District 4. Saw Matt in Marietta in the Christmas parade and subsequently said, Matt, how about stopping by? He's acquiesced to that. He's getting ready to start the session over in Tallahassee, so we've got a relatively small window to get a hold of Matt. He decided he would stop by today, and when we come back, we're going to talk to Matt about everything that is Florida. We'll talk a little bit about his district, a little bit about all of the controversial stuff going on today, and hopefully you'll learn something as I do in every show. We'll be right back. Welcome back. As mentioned, our guest today is Matt Gaetz. Thanks for taking the time. You said that you were going to be close by, happened to be over there in Bonifay. I know that it's kind of late in the day, but thank you so much for coming by.
I'm eager to be here and exciting to talk about some of the really interesting issues that are going to face the state of Florida that will impact our constituents here in the Panhandle.
As I said in the show intro, Matt, may your life be interesting, the old Chinese curse. There's a lot going on
Sure.
right now. You've got your hands full. You are the representative for Florida District 4, but you're also in the process of running for State Senate, District 1, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Let's start, for those of our viewers who don't know much about you, let's start with the nuts and bolts. Tell us a little something about Matt Gaetz.
Sure. I am a believer. I go to First Baptist Church in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. I'm an attorney by trade. The greatest blessing that God has given me is two wonderful parents, Don and Vicki Gaetz, who in life really encouraged me to believe in service. And whether that meant, pitching in with the local clubs and organizations that help community, or what I've chosen to do, and that's seek public office, it was always sort of expected in our family that because, we had the ability to serve, that we would certainly seize that opportunity.
Yeah, nothing glamorous about politics.
No.
Everything's
It becomes less glamorous by the day, I feel like.
Absolutely. You're kind of like a restaurateur. No matter what you do, you're going to make somebody mad.
That's right.
The mark of a good politician is that person who can go into politics and please people for the most part, but accept the fact that you're not going to please everyone. And there are some that just have unrealistic expectations. We live in interesting times. Lots going on right now, lots of fiscal heartburn. Personal opinion, do you think that we are seeing daylight from the 2005 bursting of the bubble? We've got indicators that look good. Sometimes it seems like we take a step back. What's your personal thoughts?
Yeah, I believe we are on the cusp of real greatness in Florida. And if we look at the economy in Florida, we see great signs. Since 2010, the unemployment rate has been cut in half. We're second in the country in private sector job creation. Last year, we cut $500 million in taxes. This year, we'll have a $1.2 billion surplus. So if you can keep cutting taxes to make Florida more affordable for people, you can actually enhance the ability to care for the vulnerable and fund infrastructure and fund our schools, because we'll have more taxpayers, not just more taxes. And I'm excited to chair the Finance and Tax Committee in the Florida House of Representatives. And so I get really to have my finger on the pulse of the economy in our state, and I see that there are a few economic indicators that are really driving our success. The first is tourism. This last year in 2015, 103 million people visited the state of Florida. Sometimes it feels like all of them are on Highway 77 and 79, but when folks come to Florida, every 85 tourists that come to the state creates a job. And it's great to see our young people being able to work in that industry, and many are able to build careers in the tourism space. So I'm a big believer that if we want to continue to have an economy that provides for the vulnerable, that gives us the resources we need, we have to continue to be an inviting place for visitors. The other is new home construction. The contribution of new home construction to the economy of Florida is up 52%. So we're growing, and more people are choosing to live in our state. Now that comes with great opportunity, because people bring their dreams, their businesses, at times the money that they've saved in other parts of the country to then come here and spend in the state of Florida. But as we also know, it brings challenges, because those folks end up in our roads, they end up in our hospitals, they need law enforcement services. And so we've got to make sure that when people come to Florida, we continue to do the things that keep Florida special, so that this is one of the most exciting and productive places to live, work, and raise a family.
Couple of points there. When you speak of tourism, obviously huge. Am I correct in the statistics that it's 22% up from last year?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, that's huge.
You look at that, and it's just hundreds of millions of dollars in additional revenue for the state of Florida. But more than just revenue to the state, it means jobs for our community. And we, sometimes I'm guilty of it, Paul. I'll sit there in traffic and I'll be looking at a Missouri license plate or a Tennessee license plate, and I'll think, man, why am I sitting here behind these folks? But we also know, as a result of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, what happens in our economy when those folks don't come. And in a way, that oil spill and the one summer where really people weren't coming to the state of Florida for their visits, we really got a chance to better appreciate the impact that tourism has across our economy. So I'm excited about some things we can do in Tallahassee to make sure that we're still feeding the golden goose that is tourism.
Yeah, we moved to Panama City Beach in the early 70s and were there for 30 years and lived fairly close to the water. Saw that progression. Now it's literally a 12-month business. At one time, just 100 days, and then it would roll up the streets until the next spring break, or AEA as they called it back in those days. But now we've got the snowbirds, which morph into the Mardi Gras season and the high school spring break, and then on into the summer and so forth. You championed not too long ago, or at least opened the dialogue about potentially taking 20% of Tourist Development County monies. Explain what that was about. Yeah,
well, I didn't champion that idea. That was what I think was misreported, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to address it. I chair, as I mentioned, the Finance and Tax Committee, and I do that a little differently than probably most folks that chair legislative committees. My approach is, whenever we discuss a subject, whether it's affordable housing, whether it's research taxes or tourism, we start by allowing every stakeholder, every person with an idea, to present their idea, and then we fully vet them. And in my belief, when we have the broadest array of options, then we can whittle down to the things that are truly important. Now, there were some who thought that one thing we could do to help tourism was to create a dedicated funding source for Visit Florida, and that we could use the tourist development tax generated locally to do that. So we vetted that idea, we discussed it, we kicked it around, and ultimately the members of my committee and I decided that that's not something that we're going to pursue this year. What we are going to pursue is more local control and local flexibility over the use of tourist development tax funds. Did you know we are the only state in America that has a tourist development tax that doesn't allow any part of that tax to be used to offset some of the costs generated by visitors? In Las Vegas, they use their tourist development tax for roads and bridges and walkovers. In Chicago, they do that. In not Orlando, but in New York, they do that. In the state of Florida, my hope is that we could carve out 10% of the gross revenue from tourist development taxes. And if a local community wanted to use those funds to enhance law enforcement services so that our visitors are safe and so our residents are safe, that they could do that, because I don't think that 100% of the cost of law enforcement ought to be borne by the local taxpayer.
The second thing I mentioned was the home building. 52% increase, you say. That is since when?
That is since 2010.
Okay.
Yeah, up 52% as far as its contribution to the overall state economy. And look, in Florida, you go back to even the 1920s, there's a pretty simple model. For the economy to be doing well, we have to be growing. Whether we sold land by the acre or by the foot or occasionally by the gallon, we have to be selling and growing. And of course, we've got to do that responsibly. We've got to have the right infrastructure in place. We've got to make sure that our education system can support new people who come to Florida. But I'm a believer that our best days are ahead of us and that we can do a lot more. And in the Panhandle, we're really the best place to grow because we've got a fantastic workforce, we've got the land, we've got all of the natural advantages. And, down in Boca Raton, they're probably pretty happy just living behind their gated communities and not changing much. So in Northwest Florida, we can be the most dynamic region in the entire state.
Yeah, the pristine natural resources alone. We're also probably going to be the least or the last affected as things potentially get bad elsewhere. One word answer, first blush, Rick Scott.
Effective. Rick Scott is focused on job creation, and we've created over 700,000 private sector jobs since he took over as governor. So I count that as a win.
Having a businessman there makes a big difference.
Sure, and I don't agree with Rick Scott on every issue. And, I've learned that in public service, you can disagree with someone without being disagreeable. But I think that, it's admirable that Governor Scott really views job creation as the foundation of a strong state. This is a guy who grew up in public housing. This is a guy who knows what it's like when a single mom, loses her job and you don't know where the next meal's coming from. And him having that empathy for people who are struggling, who need work, really drives him to make sure that we have more economic opportunities in Florida.
We here in Washington County are, for the most part, fiscally conservative, conservative in most ways. We're very happy to see Rick Scott be among those governors that told the president that they didn't want some of the refugees here. Whether that will hold true, from your insight, what's going on with that situation?
Well, I am deeply troubled about the idea that the federal government can effectively screen refugees. Remember, Paul, the leader of ISIS, the founder of ISIS, was someone we had in federal custody. We had him in a prison overseas, and we screened him and we let him go, and then al-Baghdadi went and started ISIS. So I don't have 100% confidence in the federal government's ability to screen people. What I do know is that ISIS has said that they intend to embed some of their operatives with refugees. And look, we are at war. We are a nation at war, and when you see things like what occurred in San Bernardino, you have to accept the reality that could happen anywhere. And so I'm glad that Governor Scott, after receiving a letter from Senator Gaetz and myself urging him to do so, stepped up and told Congress that there had to be more robust screening. We needed to not take refugees right now, and the state of Florida needed far more information about folks that were presumably being sent here without our knowledge. And so he's shown real leadership.
It seems like every election cycle for the last 3 or 4, we've always said the harbingers of doom and gloom, never a more important election. We're saying it again, and probably with good reason, with the presidential cycle. Just yesterday, we had some executive orders concerning gun sales. Give me your first blush opinion on that. I know it hasn't all been washed out.
Totally unconstitutional that the president would use the executive power to just do an end run around Congress to abridge people's Second Amendment rights. As you know, Paul, a bill I've sponsored here in the state legislature has gotten a lot of attention, and that is the open carry bill, which would allow Floridians with a concealed carry permit to be able to carry their firearms openly. And I'm a big believer in liberty and freedom. I mean, I think that, like you mentioned about politics, you can do a lot of things that can make some folks happy or some folks unhappy. But if you stick to your principles, then you are at least a reliable public servant. My principles are to obey the Constitution. The Constitution is not a suggestion. It is not, the Constitution constrains government so that we keep the people of this great country strong. And one of those rights reserved to the people is the right to bear arms. And I think we ought to fully vindicate that right. I do not believe that the president's executive orders will stand up in court. I think the courts will strike them down, just as the courts struck down the president's immigration executive orders.
We're starting to see some civil disobedience. We're seeing, even beyond that, the situation in Oregon. Do you feel that, you mentioned that you are an optimistic person and that you think that better days are ahead, and I couldn't disagree. But we have to look at reality. Do you feel that we are looking at worse times before we see better?
Well, I think we've had times of great division as a result of this president's leadership. I think that when someone becomes president of the United States, they don't accept that role to facilitate a very narrow ideology on either side of the political spectrum. I think that the president, I look back to these great inspirational moments in Ronald Reagan's presidency, several in George W. Bush's presidency, where we worked to bring the country together around a series of common ideas. And look, it's easy when we watch the traditional media to see these talking heads where everybody is purposefully divided so that they can create conflict. But at the end of the day, we have far more in common than we have differences. And if we would focus on our commonalities and the way to move our societies forward and our community forward, I think we would be able to do a lot better, not just nationally, but at the state and local level as well. And so I think that what we are really hungry for is the type of leadership that inspires that within us that is common to the American experience.